This is Rob Kilmer. They closed a $26 billion budget gap in California this week. Why? Because they had to. That's what we're talking about this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. As always, callers to the show will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests on the show will be treated with complete respect. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topic up for the next week's show. You can also visit my blog through the site. You can read my posts and leave your own. You can always listen to my show live on streaming audio on www.wnbf.com. And my show is then uploaded to youdefendit.com later on Saturdays, and you can listen to it from there if you missed it live. Finally, there is a new debate suggestion section on my website. It is at the top of the home page. You can leave me your thoughts on topics, debaters, and questions, particularly for those of you who attended the filming of the pilot for the You Defend It debate series. Okay, California. They closed a $26 billion budget gap. I'm going to read excerpts from two reports on it. One was 10 hours ago from a news source called AFP, which I had not heard of. And AFP says that it covers the world with a combined 5,000 stories a day in English, French, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and Arabic. I'm going to read it in English. San Francisco. California lawmakers passed a deal to fix the state's multi-billion-dollar budget deficit, approving a package of wide-ranging spending cuts after a marathon legislative session. Both Republicans and Democrats stepped up to the challenge, and I want to thank the legislative leaders and the entire legislature for passing this difficult but necessary budget solution that cuts state spending, reforms government so that it runs more efficiently, and does not raise taxes. The proposed budget, agreed on Monday after arduous bipartisan negotiations, has attracted howls of protest across California for its brutal $15 billion cuts to services such as education and health care. Democratic lawmakers have defended the spending cuts as a necessary evil due to an unprecedented drop in revenues caused by the recession, which has fueled soaring unemployment and skyrocketing home foreclosures. The budget crisis had pushed California, which would have the world's 8th largest economy if it were a country, to the brink of bankruptcy, sending the state's credit rating plunging and forcing it to start paying its bills with IOUs. Most of the cuts outlined in the budget were approved, although a deeply controversial measure to allow drilling for oil off the coast of Santa Barbara, which would have generated revenues of $100 million, was not approved. Speaking before the final approval was sealed on Friday, Governor Schwarzenegger warned that the likelihood of further falls in state revenues could see a fresh budget crisis in a few months' time. We're not out of the waters yet, Schwarzenegger said in an interview with the MSNBC network. There still could be further drops in revenues. We could be back here 6 months from now to make more cuts if necessary. And that's the end of that article. Second article I'm going to read to you from is from the New York Times, dated today. California budget deal closes $26 billion gap. After several days of nearly endless debate, California lawmakers on Friday, signed off on a budget deal that closes a $26 billion gap and shores up state finances for now. Mr. Schwarzenegger, a Republican, will sign the document next week. It's not an easy budget, it's a tough budget, but it's a necessary budget, he said in a news conference immediately after the deal was sealed. The budget contains a vast array of spending cuts that will soon be felt throughout the state. The kindergarten through 12 education budget, which also includes community colleges, lost $6.1 billion, and higher education took a $2 billion hit. The state will also save $1.3 billion by furloughing state workers 3 days every month. Medicaid took a $1.3 billion cut, not including a $129 million trim to the state's program that insures children whose families make too much for them to receive Medicaid. But now the state will borrow about $2 billion from local governments, which has to be repaid within 3 years, and which those governments can borrow against in the short term. Okay. So California had a $26 billion budget problem, and it had to be resolved, and we've been talking about it on this show for weeks, and now it has been. And as noted and predicted, there were howls of protest by the people who, or organizations that suffered cuts as a result of the way the budget turned out. From what I have been able to read so far, there's no new revenue. They closed this gap. Well, there's no real revenue in the form of tax increases. There's some sleight of hand going on with borrowing from local governments. But the lion's share of this budget problem was resolved via spending cuts. And I think this is important, as I have said before about this. This is important for America to watch what happens now. This is going to happen. He's going to sign it. There are going to be budget cuts. There are going to be huge budget cuts. And there are going to be cuts in areas that people really care about. And people care about them because they are important issues, education and health care. We're going to take a break right now, but when I come back, we're going to talk about just what this means and what really an opportunity this is for California and the United States as a whole to learn from these budget cuts how to solve the resulting problems. We will be right back. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. So the broader question right now, the important question, in my view, is what will Californians do? I mean, they've had $6 billion cut from higher education. $2 billion from higher education. Kindergarten through 12, $6.1 billion, which for some strange reason also includes community colleges. $1.3 billion for state workers has been cut. They've cut Medicaid. What are they going to do? The answer is simple. Whatever they have to do. We're talking about the most important things in people's lives. When we're talking about parents with children, their children's education is critical to them. When we're talking about health insurance for children, their children's health and having them insured so that any health problem doesn't quickly bring a family to financial ruin is critical to these people. They'll find a way. The real solution here isn't anything that Schwarzenegger or the legislature did. The long-term solution is going to be what the people of California do in response to that. The ideas that people come up with, the manner in which they deal with the consequences of this budget will become the solution to the budget long term and will prevent what has already happened in California from happening again. This is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. Fundamentally, California couldn't afford what it had. You know, it's obvious that its ongoing obligations were dependent upon an economy that was operating at a certain level. And when the economy stopped operating at that level, you had these problems. What Californians do in the next year or so will insulate them. They will not be vulnerable to the ebbs and flows of their state and the national economy anymore. The solutions they come up with will not involve state dollars. You watch. You know, I don't print all of these articles. They're just too darn long, and I don't want to read for the first half hour of the show. One of the things I should have left in the article from the New York Times was some quotes from Schwarzenegger in response to questions that, well, you know, the fabled utopia of California is no more. You know, isn't this the end of California as we know it? And he sort of said something along the lines of, well, California is, you know, we'll bounce back, or, you know, nothing too terribly inspiring. But when I read that part of it, I was thinking to myself, they will bounce back because they're the first to deal with the problem. They're going to be on top of this. They're going to be first in line to do it. They are the first state to deal with it. They will show the rest of the country how, but they will be first in line as far as recovering. They dealt with their problems. What did we do in New York? You know, we had Ringling Brothers in town for 2 months. That's about it. We didn't address our long-term budget problems in New York. I don't know if I will be able to get to the phone calls before 8:30, but I will try. I mean, California has shown the way again. I think it's ironic that some of the articles I've read have said, well, you know, California is so innovative. California is the first to do everything. Well, now look where they are. And I read it as they're doing it again. Who'd have thought in a liberal state like California, now they have their own constitution, which requires 2/3 vote to increase taxes and things like that. But California is cutting where other states are trying to find ways to pay for things. California is saying no more. And I think that the reason Obama didn't help California is to get an education into how to fix the rest of the country. All right. Frank, I believe, is on line one. You there, Frank?
Good morning, Mr. Kilmer.
Morning, Frank. Were you at the debate?
No.
And that's the end of this call. No. Go ahead.
Well, hey, since you brought that up, I'll tell you why.
Oh, no. Do I? Just tell me what you call it about.
No, I have something called spinal stenosis.
I knew it. I wish I hadn't. I'm sorry I brought it up.
But anyway, I can't sit for long, can't stand for long. Rather than have the audience tar and feather me, I figured I would catch the debate on a future TV show
All right.
If, and this is a big if, a certain talk show host would exercise due diligence. Now I'm talking like a lawyer.
I am exercising due diligence.
Good.
I'll get this thing going. I'll get it running somewhere. Although you won't see that episode. That's a pilot that.
Oh, I won't see. You won't see that.
No, that is an example that we are bringing to the networks of what we can do with healthcare and immigration and things like that.
No, I wish I could go to things like that, but.
Well, Frank, I will make sure you get a copy. How's that sound?
It's good to me.
So what's going on?
The only difference I would note is that I've read the California spending cuts are $20 billion, not $15 billion. Now, my question to you is, how do we get Obama infused with the idea of budget cuts and not infinite spending? That's my question to you.
Well,
I mean, if it works in California, why doesn't it work in New York State? Why doesn't it work in the United States?
I think it would work in New York State, but the fundamental difference between what Obama is trying to do or needs to do and what Schwarzenegger needs to do is that Obama needs to stimulate the economy and Schwarzenegger needs to respond to Obama's failure to stimulate the economy. So
you mean I have to believe what the Vice President Biden said, that we have to spend our way out of a collapse? I don't think so. It doesn't work that way in the family. I don't think it works that way in the country, but be that as it may.
Well, there's an awful lot of money being spent. There's no question about that, and that's without health care. But I do think that on the...
It's 5% to 10% of the stimulus, depending upon who you believe.
Has been spent?
Yeah. And that tells me that and if you look at the original plans call for the spending to be just before 210. Now, what happens in 210? The election.
I turned 30.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, yeah, and then you have the census there, too, as well.
Yeah. Well, we've got to keep Acorn people busy. They're not getting enough money.
You're breaking my rules, Frank, among other things. Well, I think that California has shown the way with spending cuts. I don't know, as far as the economy on the whole is concerned, if you can cut spending and stimulate it. I think Obama and Schwarzenegger have different types of problems that they're dealing with. But I do think that there will come a time when the economy is back on its feet and it will be time to cut certain things. And I think, my own personal belief, that the reason Obama did not step in to help out California is to see it done.
Well, grudgingly, I have to admit that you were right about that. In fact, you spoke so forcefully that it sounded as if you had inside information on it.
I do not.
Okay. But you were right. Hey, you know what I'm hoping? I'm hoping the Blue Dog Democrats will provide the necessary stimulus for Obama. I really like those guys.
Well, right now they're, they are the bloc that's going to determine the legislation on health care, if there is any.
I mean, all the fingers are pointing towards the Republicans, and the fate of the U.S. rests in the hands of the Blue Dogs.
We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Thanks for calling.
Have fun.
Okay. Bye. Okay. There are sort of cross purposes there. I don't think that what I think Obama is learning. Obama cannot stimulate the economy by cutting spending. He just can't. However, the theory is that at some point in time the economy will recover and there will be opportunities, or not just opportunities, but really the necessity to cut spending. And when that happens, when that time comes, I think California will have shown the way. And more importantly, by that time, you will see how the shortfalls that California is going to be experiencing are handled by the public in California. You are going to see creative solutions to these problems that are going to be sustainable. I got a call I do want to get to before the break here. Bob from Binghamton, you there?
Yes, I am. Good morning. How are you this morning?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Well, I listen to you almost every Saturday when I flip the radio on, when I get up to do house cleaning. And I had this thought this morning. I like the premise of your show, which seems to me to be that if you're given the facts, most people or many people will use rational problem solving to come up with a solution to a problem.
Okay.
And I think the difficulty is twofold. Number one, we don't get facts. You look at newspapers, you look at talk radio shows, and essentially you get a variety of opinions, but not real. And this applies to everything from budgetary problems that we're experiencing all the way through climate change and global warming. I agree. I think the average guy, if he's given the facts and defines what the problem is, will come up with a rational solution. But finding the facts is so difficult, and getting past the hurdle of belief systems. For example, the Democrats that are in power now have a certain belief system that seems to swing toward ideas of distribution of wealth and things like that, where regardless of a counter-argument that says fiscal restraint is the way to go when you've overspent, they have a fundamental belief system and they don't listen to factual information.
Well, I think that they have a fundamental philosophy
right.
That is different than the Republicans, although, as we've talked about on this show, Republican presidents are responsible for 90% of the deficit incurred under Republican presidents. And every year since 1981, spending has gone up in this country. I think the beauty of what's going on in California is that there's finally somebody in charge of a state, in charge of something, who's willing to cut. Every president continues to spend and spend and spend. The difference is in the way they pay for it. Republicans tend to borrow. Democrats tend to raise taxes. Whether you think it's more responsible to pay as you go or to borrow and see if the economy will pick up to pay that off, that's been the philosophical difference between the parties since I've been interested.
Absolutely. And again, I go back to the problem that, I'm an average guy out here, we're trying to earn a living. The problem I have, and I'll use global warming as an example, there's mostly what you get is fractions of information and tremendous amount of belief layered on top of that, where I don't think anybody wants to destroy the planet, but give me the factual information before you start dipping into my pocket and changing social policy and changing the tax base and stop teaching my kids something that may or may not be true.
You mean as far as global warming being real and man-made?
Yes. And, the kids are already coming home from grade school crying about polar bears, where I heard another piece of fragment of factual information saying over the last 10 years the polar bear population has doubled. It's very difficult to sort through the variety of belief systems out there that kind of form what the facts that you get are, where there was in taking logic in college, one of the things that came up in one of the discussion groups was, if you tell me who's doing the observation, I'll tell you what the conclusion is going to be. And there's a lot of truth in that.
Oh, I agree. I think it's up to you to sort through and get as many facts as you can from as many different sources as you can. You can't trust. I agree with you. I mean, I don't look to any one place for information anymore. In fact, since I started doing this show, which is a political show, I find myself unable to watch political shows. Like, I don't watch the Sunday morning shows anymore. It's just, it's just too many statements that are not verified, in my view. And at least there's no attempt to. Somebody should sort through them after the show and verify them. I gotta kind of run along here. I got to take a little break. I was supposed to at 8:30. Thanks for calling in.
I appreciate your program.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, we're going to take a little break here at 8:30 for local news and be back after that. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It. The phone number to call into the show is 607-772-1290. All right, we were talking about California and the fact that they've had to resolve a $26 billion problem. They did it primarily by cutting things. And my point is that the people who react to this, the people who meet the needs that are now going to be unmet as a result of the loss of money, they will be the ones showing us the long-term solutions to these problems. They'll be doing it without state or federal money. It may be religious groups. Parents may take a more active role with respect to education. You are just simply going to find people, as always, meeting the challenge. You know what inspires a creative solution? A real crisis. Not a possible crisis, not a looming crisis, not the potential for a crisis. For some of these people, the people who are most affected by these budget cuts, the crisis is here and now. And they will find a way to deal with it because the issues at stake are important to them. They involve their children. They involve their children's education. They involve their children's health care. Solutions will be found, I assure you. And that's what I think we will build on going forward. I mean, California is not the only state in the country with budget problems. I would like to think that New York could follow the example of California, but it's simply hard to watch what goes on in New York and expect anything to be resolved. But there will be an example offered out there if our government, New York State government, is willing to take it. And I also want to point out something that I pointed out on this show previously. To my knowledge, not one group that was howling in protest offered an alternative solution. They read the news like you and I. They follow the ongoing meetings of the legislature, give press conferences saying this will devastate children, this will do this will do that. But they don't say this is what should be done instead in a constructive way. I mean, I'm sure there's a line out the door of advocates for these issues saying, well, they should be cutting something else. You know, a constructive solution involving all the parties involved. And I know this is my pie-in-the-sky suggestion that people I know who've talked to me outside of this show have ridiculed, but what if all the groups who stood to be affected by this, all of them, what if they met themselves without the government and brought to the government a proposal that they agreed on? You know, I've told you before, I think, that in certain court cases, particularly divorce cases, good judges will have the people in. There's a conference when a divorce action is commenced. There's a mandatory conference. And at the conference, the judges will say at the beginning, you really need to resolve this yourselves. I will resolve it. If you can't come to a settlement, I will make a decision. One of you will not like it. And I don't know you. I don't know you at all. I don't know your children. I will listen as best I can. I will do my best to learn as much as I can. I will listen carefully to what everybody tells me and try and make the best decision possible. However, a settlement that you put together is going to be infinitely better than a decision that I hand down, because you will know so much more of the facts than I will. You'll have a day or two for a trial. You've been living with your kids for years. You've been living with yourselves for years. You know, it's the people in California who stood to be affected by these problems, by these budget cuts, which was every group in California, every interest group, every sector, every organization or department or agency that's part of that budget should have gotten together with every other one. I mean, I don't know the numbers in California. I don't know whether they have a $260 billion budget and they had a $26 billion deficit, in which case if everybody came up with a way to cut their agency by 10%, that would be that. But now there's going to be real pain, and hopefully, not hopefully, I guarantee you, the problems created by these budget cuts will be resolved by the people who care about them. And they're ahead of the game, really, even though in the short term they're suffering. They are at the point where they are going to be arriving at solutions that will sustain them long term, because they will be solutions that don't depend on state money. Lucas, you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. Welcome to the show.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of things that New York can do that is entirely inside of New York's discretion. For example, take welfare. How much a given state, in other words, the federal government sets a certain minimum of what the welfare check's going to be. Every state then decides how much more they're going to add to it. And states like New York and California have been the ones offering some of the highest welfare, and that means that draws on state revenue. And I'm using welfare as an example, and I know there's 99 different social programs mandated by the federal government.
Lucas, we got a pretty bad connection here. Are you on a cell phone?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, but it's very difficult to hear you. I may have you call back.
Okay, well, part of the problem is especially with New York, we've got the folks in Albany got used to Wall Street paying for everything.
That's true.
Every time Wall Street has a bad year, then they get in trouble in Albany. And traditionally, Albany's response has been to raise taxes. Now, the problem with raising taxes is, well, once upon a time, raising taxes means more revenue. The problem that was demonstrated under Kennedy, Reagan, and the second Bush was that if you cut taxes, you actually increase revenue, and that's because there is a certain point in the economy where you have a point of diminishing returns as far as taxes. In other words, you raise taxes beyond a certain point, you stop getting more tax revenue because people start doing things to either they quit working and decide to sponge off the system, or you got rich people who pack their bags and saying, okay, I'm going to live in the Bahamas.
Yeah, and this is always my counterpoint, I guess, to that. The only way that is an economically viable approach is if there is a commitment. Every time you cut taxes, you incur a deficit. And the problem is, with Reagan and Bush, they didn't pay it back.
Well, Reagan,
when the money started coming in, when George Bush ran for president in 2000, he said if there's an annual surplus and taxes are too high. I'm sitting there thinking, what about paying back the money that you used to fund the tax cuts in the first place? That's why, to me, I don't believe in it, because I don't think it's intellectually honest, because there's never the intention to follow through and pay the money back.
Well, here's problem. When Reagan did it, he had a handshake deal with Tip O'Neill and the Democrats that they would come up with, in other words, they would do something if he did something. What happened is Reagan did his stuff first, and then when it came time for the Democrats to honor their side of the bargain, they went and said, what bargain?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, but hold on, let me slow you down here. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Reagan also raised taxes twice.
Yeah, that was part of the bargain.
But and the real benefits of Reagan's tax cuts were not seen during his presidency. They took time, and I'm not blaming him. I'm saying that, as he predicted, the economy would build over time. But to me, the pivotal point in that whole economic argument is, if you're saying, all right, we're going to cut taxes, we know that it's going to create a deficit in the short term because there's less revenue, but in the long term, there's going to be so much more revenue from a better economy that we will be able to pay back that money. We will pay down the deficit. They don't do it.
Yep. The problem is you have most of the time you have legislatures, let's say Congress and all that, it's when more money comes in, they spend more money, and it's usually on things that are not economically productive.
Right, but the same president who can get a tax cut through Congress can make the case that the money needs to be repaid. People understand that. That case is never made. When George Bush ran for president, and Al Gore, to his shame, who should have been saying, wait a minute, if there's a surplus, we should be paying back the deficit. He went along with a certain additional tax cut as well. I just think that, I think you and I would agree that politicians at that level say things people want to hear. But as far as mathematics are concerned, if your theory is I'm going to create a short-term deficit for a better long-term economy that's going to generate more tax revenue, but you don't take that tax revenue and pay back that short-term deficit, then it's not an intellectually honest argument. You're not going to follow through on it, and you know it. I've run long here. I got to go to one more break, but thanks for calling in.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Okay. There is certainly merit. I think it's been proven over time that lowering taxes can stimulate the economy. The problem is the deficits you create when you do that are never repaid. We will be back shortly. You're listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WMBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. I have Paul on the line from the town of Fenton. You there, Paul?
Yes, sir. Rob, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Hey, Rob, I have what I'm called a 75% rule.
Okay.
And that would be a rule that would eliminate earmarks and pork, which I think is of interest to most Americans. And the premise is this, that 75% of every tax dollar that we, the American people, pay stays in our individual counties. And government's a service provider, obviously. So we, the people, put forth a menu of services that we want from the federal government. I'll use national defense as one. We know we have to pay for that, military. But as far as education goes, maintaining our infrastructure, taking care of our elderly, the indigent, etc., and primarily education, I think, that's a local responsibility. And if we did this, and I make the claim that in Broome County, as an example, we've got a lot of smart people. We can figure out how to do it, and I think do it very well. And what it would eliminate is, of course, the smoke and mirrors of at the national level and at the state level, and the politics of who gets the money, because it's our money and it's our responsibility. Simple example would be maybe if you live in a rural southern county and you can't afford, there's not enough people that live there, then you as an adult with a family have to make a decision. Do I want to live here where my kids can't get a good education, for example? So it all boils down to it's our money, it's our responsibility, and it's our duty. And I think that we're fools and sheep if we send our money to a politician of either party and expect to get anything good back with it, other than what we request or demand, which would be national defense. And I don't think there's too many more things we need. We need a stable currency and et cetera. But I think from the federal government, it would be limited. From the state government, it would almost be non-existent. What do we need from the state?
Well, let me just see if I understand what you're saying. You're saying that the federal government should not involve itself in what you believe are local issues, and therefore our taxes should be
spent locally.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
by the county government.
Exactly. I use the county as an example. That's a form that I'm happy with, or that I could be happy with. In other words, I think more people would be involved, more people would vote, more people would pay attention. We'd have more control. We in Broome County happen to have pretty good school systems. We have a reasonable quality of life, although we're burdened, I think, with a lousy state government and too many local governments. We don't need 24, and we don't need 12 school districts, certainly. But I think when it's your own money and there's the elimination of the smoke and mirrors, there would be no pork. If we want to build a mushroom museum here in Broome County or a carousel museum or whatever we want to do, it's our money. We do it. And if we don't want to do it, we don't do it. Eliminate, in other words, government uses the smoke, the politicians use the smoke and mirrors. Moynihan said it many years ago. New York sends a lot of money to Washington that goes to other states. It's a free market concept. If you live in a community that can't sustain itself, you got to leave. Right? I mean, the number one responsibility for a parent is to get their kids a good education. If you're in a lousy area, you better get out of that. You better get where there's a good education for your kids.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, or work to build a better education where you are, but that is going to involve money, and that it sounds like what you're proposing, you wouldn't necessarily support spending, with a smaller tax base, the kind of money that would be needed to...
That would be up to the individuals. If I choose to live someplace where there's if I choose to live in a rural community, then obviously the school district's going to encompass a greater geographical area.
Right.
But I think it boils back down to individual responsibility, individual commitment, individual involvement. And we don't, right now, national health care is a perfect example, Rob. It's the individual's responsibility to pay for their own health care. And as a middle-class American, I know that I'm going to pay for mine, and I'm going to pay for the indigent. I accept that responsibility, but I don't want to turn it over to a bureaucrat.
Okay.
I believe in the free market.
Well, you have called this show and taken a position and defended it. You are the perfect guest.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I actually remember, much as he bugs me now, what's his name? Randall Terry, when he was running for Congress, he actually said, which I thought was a good point, proof positive that I am fair and balanced, that we send money to Washington and our representatives kind of grade themselves on how much of it they're able to pry back out of Washington and bring here. That they tout that as a success, how much of the money we've sent there that we can actually get back. And it was an interesting point. It was a good point. But leaving off, got another just minute or two here. invite you to watch California handle its problems. I honestly believe that the legislature has done its job, as has the governor. They've cut. I mean, there's no more money to spend. That's an absolute. You just can't keep creating revenue streams where there aren't any. They made one attempt with some drilling, and that was shot down on environmental concerns. But other than that, that was it. There's just not enough money to pay for what you have. So you've got to get rid of some of it. And now they have. But the people who are affected by this will step up. And what they do to resolve the problem and the way they handle it and the solutions they implement will be the long-term solutions. Because they don't rely on federal money. They don't rely on state money. They rely on some other way. And it's that some other way that will be the way going forward. And I think there will be a lot to learn from this. You watch. It's not like education is going to go away in California, or people are going to be sick, and there isn't going to be a way to treat them. Somebody will step up. Some creative person or organization or group of people will step up, and they will solve that problem. And that's the silver lining to any crisis. Well, thank you for listening to You Defend It. And visit my website, www.youdefendit.com. We will be back next week.